philosophy talks about, we have these essences that as you go higher to more abstraction, you end up understanding you know less, but you know a little bit. But you don't want to be saying, "Oh, here, come on, drink." You don't do that. That's not it. And so this is really a similar issue that Paul is saying to the Corinthians who are so sure of themselves. Hey, I mean that's his reason for saying, if food is a cause of someone else's falling, I will never eat meat, so I will never cause them to fall. I mean that's just his take on it. That if it's going to cause someone else a problem, I'm not going to do it.
According to this, everybody knows it's wrong. Why are we eating?
Everyone knows it's wrong to say that same one.
If people know it's wrong and see you eating, you might cause them.
Right. And so it's not that everyone knows that it's wrong. In fact, Paul says it doesn't matter to eat the meat sacrificed to an idol because he's agreeing with the Corinthians that it's absolutely fine because that meat, that idol doesn't exist and so it's fine to eat it. But he says there's other people with other opinions, other views of it, and those people, it causes them to fall, it causes them to stumble. And that's why he's choosing not to do it. You shouldn't eat pork chops in front of Jews. Well, I mean, it depends. I mean, they're going to say, no, we shouldn't. Um, definitely shouldn't be serving, bacon wrapped scallops to Jews because.
I knew a Jewish guy that would bet a Catholic priest on the Notre Dame game. The loser had to eat pork chops on Friday.
Oh my. Sounds like the start of a joke, no, but
I'm not saying they did, but
yeah, a Jew and a Catholic priest would bet to, on a Notre Dame game, and whoever won, would end up have to eat pork chops on Friday. I mean well, whoever lost had to eat pork chops on Friday, which during Lent is a no-no for Catholics, and pork chops any day is a no-no for observant Jews, depending on what type, because some folks are sort of like, not an issue. Um, but yeah, there's sort of this idea: how are you going to respond to others? How do you deal with their weaknesses? How do you end up, you might be able to do all kinds of stuff without a problem because you have a different understanding and it doesn't bother you. But what about other folks? How do you take that on? And so that is the lesson here. That, don't take these liberties that you have if it's going to cause other people to stumble. So, what can you do? Is there anything that you can do that doesn't cause other people to stumble? Exactly. That's the hard part of this. Is sort of like there's almost anything I could think of that might cause someone else to stumble, and how do I deal with that? That becomes a hard spot. Exactly. Exactly. And so this is where you have to do a little bit of, common sense. Exactly. Okay, if I know specifically that this is going to cause this person to stumble, I'm not going to do it around them. It's not going to be something that, I'm going to end up, going after. So if someone is just starting on recovery from alcoholism, take some time and not drink around them, and enjoy soft drinks and spending time with them. If someone else is dealing with, issues of suicide, it may not be, don't talk about suicide, but it may be, You know, talk about emotions and find emotional connection with them, rather than, just avoiding the subject. Because, people who are contemplating suicide, dealing with that significant depression, a sense of connection, is often something that can be helpful. And so these become those touchstones, and we have to apply these in a way that that is common sense, but sees the bigger picture. That it's not about knowledge, about knowing. And so if we're thinking about Christian theology, it's not about correct doctrine. Oh my gosh, did I just say that as a good Calvinist? That is not about correct doctrine, but that's what Paul is coming down to. That it's not about the right knowledge, it's about the right action. It's about the loving action, the one that puts the other first. The knowledge does have to be there, but knowledge is not the thing that you're pushing. That so that's something that I've been struck by recently. So one of the things that I have bumped up against is realizing that I don't know that much about Judaism. I know enough to be dangerous. And so I've been doing some reading on, the development of Jewish philosophy and Jewish practice over the millennia. And one of the things that hits me is that they aren't as concerned about correct belief. They're more concerned about correct action. And so if you look at all the rules and regulations for conservative or Orthodox Judaism, it's all about making sure that they are practicing those different mitzvahs, different laws that are there in the Torah. There's about 614 of them, in a way that follows them and embodies them. Now, we have to be careful because Jesus was very clear, these rules don't make it legalistic. But they aren't concerned about, are we believing the right thing? Because proper belief is what earns salvation. It's, are we acting the right way in response to what God has done? And so that becomes a guiding point, I think, for us. Not do we have the correct belief about, is it predestination, or is it, free will, or is it, there's 7 sacraments or 2 sacraments. If we listen to this, the goal is, how are you loving your neighbor? How are you loving that person that's there? How are you acting around them to help them live out what God is calling them to? And so I gotta say, that's harder than correct doctrine.
If the Jews really believe that, why are there so many that are in the diamond business or that type of businesses that really don't lend much, I don't think, to society?
Well, I mean, part of it is tradition and training and places that they can end up making a living. So if we look at the history of Judaism, Jews were not, in Europe, Jews were not given the permission to own land. And that meant that farming was outside of the scope of what they were able to do. And and so they ended up in the sort of the money management, money lending, banking sector quite often, because of some traditions that happened in the Middle Ages where Christians were not allowed to lend with interest, but Jews were absolutely able to do so. And so with that, when you're suddenly transacting things that can, pass between different communities, moving into precious stones makes a whole lot of sense because if you have to up and move, you want to be able to take that wealth with you because oftentimes Jews were pushed out of places that they had lived. And so it's not so much that they're looking at, well, this diamond business is something that, is going to add to society. They're looking at how can we preserve the wealth that we're building and make something that we can end up taking with us if we have to leave in short order. I mean, that's the unfortunate hard reality of Judaism, is that in Europe, Jews always lived in sort of a tenuous situation where they could be forced out without any recourse and have to, leave in the middle of the night. And so held up in certain locations, they've just stayed, engaged with it because it brings in money, it pays the bills. And so it's not so much, it doesn't add anything, but they're looking at how am I living out and following the rules that God has made in the Torah. So how am I preparing food? How am I, dressing? How am I, observing the Sabbath? All of these things are ones that they're really concerned about. There's a number of laws in the Torah that they can't follow through with because it requires the temple. It requires there are a number of rules in the Torah that Jews cannot fulfill because it requires the temple at Jerusalem. The idea of sacrifices, that's gone, and they don't worry about that at this point. There's laws about what the lamps are supposed to look like and what the priest's garments are supposed to look like. That isn't anything that's going to happen because there's no temple to have the sacrifices in. And quite honestly, they aren't interested in that. So, anyway. But yeah, this idea is that, yes, you're welcome to eat the meat from that sacrifice to idols because idols don't exist, but you need to think twice because it's having an issue for other folks that don't have that same view. You're thinking about something, Richard.
Thinking a lot about this, the knowledge of right or wrong.
Right.
What is right and what is wrong?
Well, and Paul is saying that there is no right or wrong answer here in terms of the meat itself, the stuff sacrificed to idols. He's saying that's not an issue. What's an issue is the conscience of your sisters and brothers. That's the major problem. And so you need to make choices that don't, hurt the conscience of others. Yeah, Marty.
But this is having compassion.
Oh, yeah.
Total compassion.
Absolutely, it's about compassion.
Having to understand the human nature that you can hurt people just by, well, in this day and age, just by looking at the broad. I mean, so it's just a matter of common sense. And
Right.
compassion.
Right.
But the knowledge is a whole other thing.
Right. Marty?
I was just gonna ask, are you obligated to know these?
Yeah. Yeah, there is a lot of gossip going on. Give me just a second. Sorry, folks. Sorry. Just getting over this thing is taking forever.
Because that's the reason I said something about knowledge, because in order to have compassion, you have to kind of know, you have to know something.
Yeah.
to show compassion.
In order to have compassion, in order to show love, you have to understand stuff. You have to be aware of what might be an issue for other folks? How is this going to cause problems along the way? So yes, knowledge is needed, but it's not just simply knowledge, it's compassion.
It's wisdom. I mean, wisdom, to me, is the ability to use knowledge intelligently.
Yeah, so wisdom is that understanding that goes into it. I mean, it's that common sense Bob was talking about. That wisdom is knowledge applied.
This is why I get upset with this whole business about whether you can share information about, what's the law now that's supposed to be, the HIPAA law. Because around here, we want to show compassion with people, and if we don't know what's going on,
Right, and so,
mouth an awful lot.
well, but things can be shared with, from person to person. It's just that it can't be shared from a healthcare provider to someone else, not authorized.
So in other words, you have to scoot around and do the gossip.
Yeah, you do have to have that gossip. I mean, there is such stuff. I mean, in my opinion, there is such stuff as holy gossip. That we're sharing concerns about others, not just sort of like, oh my gosh, did you see what she was wearing, or what was he thinking with that comment? I mean, it was, but oh, I heard so and so is dealing with a hip that's really bothering them, or new cancer diagnosis, or that's holy gossip, that you're talking about other people and saying, okay, now we know, how can we help? But the thing is with Health Information Privacy and Portability Act is that the healthcare providers can't disclose it. Over to Mark 1. We are in verse 21. With authority, he commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him. At once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. First thoughts and questions, ideas, random comments?
Are there still people who have that gift of driving spirits out of other people?
Are there still people with that gift of driving spirits out? And demons? And I always feel funny about that kind of question and idea, because well, in my view of the world, I end up demon or an unclean spirit. Son has attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and an anxiety disorder. So he is anxious about a lot of stuff, and focusing and doing one thing at a time, or really keeping focused if something isn't providing stimulation for him, is really difficult. On top of that, he has something called disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. And that means that his emotions are really strong, and little things can end up eliciting really strong emotions, and him being able to modulate and respond in the way that normal people with normal brain chemistry would, is really difficult. So if he ends up getting frustrated that he doesn't get, and this was a couple of years ago, if he gets frustrated that, he's not getting his way, a normal kid might stomp away and say, I don't like you. For Evan, it's, hitting, kicking, punching, throwing things. And so for people in this day and age, they would end up saying, well, that's an unclean spirit. There's something going on that he's not able to act normally. Whereas I end up looking at that and saying, okay, there's something off in the way his brain chemistry works, and it's not typical for everyone else. And so when we say, is there someone who's there who can cast out unclean spirits? I mean, my son would be someone who would be sort of this, unclean spirit, someone doing that spiritual healing. Today, our day and age, we end up going to the psychiatrist and psychologist, and we found the right, combination of medications to help him focus, to help reduce the anxiety, to help him, not have the emotional ups and downs. And so it's just a different view of the world. So,
Where they talk about all the gifts,
mm-hmm.
I forget what you call them. Isn't there a gift in there?
No, a gift of healing. Absolutely. There's a gift of healing. And so I can end up talking about that in different ways of, modern medicine is a gift of healing. It's God working through that. But then there's also the gift of being present with someone as they're dealing with the emotional loss of something, or, the hard reality of finding out that, oh my gosh, my parents, weren't as loving as I thought. They were actually abusive. I mean, that kind of being with and providing that healing is a spiritual gift, but it's a different interpretation. And so when I look at this, I end up having to do a little bit more work, because I don't have that same view that there are unclean spirits just floating around that need to be pushed out. There are some folks that still have that belief. Okay, I can understand that. It doesn't fit with my understanding of how the world works. And so when I listen to this, well, we have someone who recognizes that Jesus is someone special, someone who is bringing something that is uncomfortable, because this man, what have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? So there's sort of this view that something is going to change here. There's change coming because of who Jesus is. This man with the unclean spirit, he has some insight that other people don't have. Now, they would end up saying, because the Spirit recognizes the Spirit, that's what's going on. But we can also talk about, with some, mental illness, neurodivergent kind of situations, people have different ways of understanding the world and different insights that other folks don't always have. So if you think about, someone on the autism spectrum, they have a particular, view of the world that has lots of limitations, but there can also be some benefits. It depends on the individual and how they are able to function. And so thinking about this man who has this spiritual insight about who Jesus is, he recognizes, that there's something coming, that there's something different. And so his question is, have you come to destroy us? Have you come to get rid of us? So it's sort of like talking about the idea of unclean spirits, maybe evil, maybe, maybe it's something that is, something that is not giving life. So whatever it is, whatever this unclean spirit is, it recognizes that in front of Jesus and Jesus' holiness, it's facing a sort of life and death situation. And so the question is, have you come to destroy us? And so for me, when I end up listening to this passage, I end up thinking about change. We end up encountering Jesus, and Jesus is about us becoming more Christ-like, more like God, removing the sin from us and making us more holy. that's something that can be really scary. We may say we want to be more holy, but there's still change involved. And like someone at my first congregation said, I don't mind change as long as I don't have to do anything different. As long as I don't have to do anything different. I don't mind change as long as I don't have to do anything different. That really does sum up our experience, if I'm being honest. I don't mind change if I don't have to do anything different. It doesn't involve me, so if things can change, I'm just fine. Go ahead. But the minute that you require me to do something different, no way. We aren't going there. But for this man, he recognizes encountering Jesus is going to mean something different. He's going to have to change. And so his first reaction is, are you coming to destroy us? Is this about, hurting and killing me? Because he recognizes that holiness in Jesus is something that requires a change. And
Why does he think it would be hurting him if it would clean him out?
if it would clean him out, well, we have all kinds of stuff in our lives that we do that hurt ourselves, but we don't stop it. We don't do anything different. There are all kinds of things in our lives. There's sin all over the place. And as much as we give lip service that we love to have it gone, we're too damn comfortable with it. We're so used to it that thinking about changing that is really hard.
No, it's no different to moving our homes here.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's sort of like, oh, it's a huge change moving into a place like this. And right, some folks handle it a lot better than others, but we know that it's probably for the best, but there's still hurt and pain. You lose your friends, you lose those connections, you lose that familiarity of, here's where I'm going to the store, here's where I'm doing this. I know that, store clerk. I mean, you lose those things. And so this man, he's used to it. He's used to this unclean spirit, whatever it is. And not having it is going to end up meaning a new way of living. And that doesn't feel comfortable. Are you coming to destroy us? Yeah, Marty.
So is there no such thing as the devil then? Or is evil the devil? Or
I have a problem with sort of this external, understanding of, a being out there trying to harm us. Because I end up looking at myself and I'm sort of like, I don't need any help. I can do it just fine myself. That I can get myself in enough trouble without, a little devil trying to push me in a different direction.
Yeah, but who says it's yourself?
Well, exactly. I mean, for me, it's about, if I am looking at my own culpability, I want to put that on my shoulders.
what is evil then?
Well, evil is that stuff in the world that encourages us to be focused on our own needs and well-being rather than what's best for everyone else, and including us involved.
Where does it come from?
So this requires a theological anthropology. It requires a view of how do we as human beings exist on a theological level? Where does sin rest? How does sin come into the world? How is sin, perpetuated? And so we would have to go into all kinds of complex stuff. But for me, it's more a view that we are still human becomings. We are not human beings yet. We're still in the process. And so we have failings and faults, and we are born into this world looking for my own personal um, continuation, my own personal well-being, and what human beings are meant to do is to be in community where my well-being is tied up with everyone else's well-being, and therefore my actions need to not be self-centered but altruistic and focused on the well-being of all. Where do bad thoughts come from? It comes from that internal need for self-preservation.
Yeah, but some of them are self-preservation, just like, I mean, why would a person, this happened to me once, why would a person be driving down the road and see somebody crossing the road and think, gee, I'd like to hit that person?
It's self-interest, feeling of the rush, the emotional feelings of power and control. I mean that,
Ego.
right, so you don't have that issue. Other folks do. And when we think about evolution, when we think about that, then there is a streak in humanity that is actually evolutionarily beneficial. Because there you end up having someone who's questioning what is going to keep me alive, what is going to keep the best genetic material moving forward, which isn't what we end up seeing in a Christian view. It's not about the best genetic material, it's that all the genetic material, all of us together moving forward is the goal, with everyone living vitally. Richard, then.
Oh, I'm just becoming more and more confused.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so confusing though, because, I mean, I don't, it's impossible for me to become any holier. I mean, I'm so holy, but I mean, I know, no, really, I could never become holy, I don't think about
Right.
it that way. Why would I think about it that way? I would think about self-preservation, taking care of the kids, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, just too far out for me.
Okay, I mean, and that's why I was sort of like, theological anthropology goes in a totally different direction. I mean, so for me, it's sort of that, moving from that infant that's only focused on, am I fed, am I comfortable, am I warm, am I clean? All about self, into that person that is connected and focused on other people, and the self being fully what is fully realized as what they're created to be. It's that journey from that infant that is so focused on its own preservation to that person that is connected and is understanding their purpose, that moves beyond themselves. And so we're all somewhere in that in between stage, in that becoming stage, because Jesus in my theological anthropology is the ultimate expression of human beings, where he understands his full connection to God and those people around him, and is willing to follow that individual identity that makes him unique, but also serves others with the ultimate sacrifice of his life that brings new life.
But I think most Christians think of others. I mean, we look at them as human beings, we're not
Right.
using their,
Right, right. And there's still that self-interest that little infant that's focused on its own self that's still present and hasn't been fully realized into that transformation of the fully Christ-like life. Ellie?
I guess I'm struggling with it from the standpoint that, I can't figure out when, my Bible says that he's possessed of an evil spirit because he questions. And he doesn't even ask for himself. He says, are you coming to destroy us?
Right.
I mean, he's not just thinking about himself, he's thinking about the whole group. And I'm thinking about, has he got evil spirit simply because he's thinking about himself?
I don't know whether it's just simply about himself. It could be, I mean, so if we remember, there's another story in Luke where Jesus goes across the lake to Gennesaret, and there a man meets him at tombs, and there's multiple unclean spirits in him. And so it could be,
Into the sea or
yeah, so Jesus is pulling him out, and the spirit said, "Well, let us go into those pigs," and the pigs then go drown themselves in the sea. So what's going on here could be that it's multiple spirits, that's the we. It also could be, are you coming to destroy us? And that's what change can feel like. Jesus, have you come here to Capernaum and you're going to destroy us by pushing us to change? I mean, that's another, that would be, so if I was preaching this here, which I'm going to be preaching at Lynn, but that's going to be the focus, is that this man's question of Jesus, you're calling us to change, calling us to repent and believe, calling us to be different and more godlike. Is this an attempt to destroy us? Are we even going to be recognizable to ourselves after this is all done?
are we never supposed to question?
No, it's not about questioning. It's about why are you here? What are you up to? That part of us that wants to be in control, that wants to stay put, that doesn't want to change, that we recognize in Jesus, in the Christ, an imperative that we have to be transformed. And it doesn't feel comfortable. We don't want to be changed and transformed. And then, yeah, go ahead.
But the basic tenet of Christianity is decency, really. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, we have our commandments we follow, we have all these other things that just basics. I mean, I don't know how that can destroy anybody.
So I would end up pushing a little bit on that Christianity, while there is sort of this moral code, the ultimate end of Christianity is transformation of the individual, transformation of us to be more Christ-like.
Well, that's just another way of saying it. Are you saying there is no devil that tempts us?
I just,
Because it does say in the Bible, the devil is like a roaring lion,
uh-huh.
wanting to devour us. And it gives 3 examples of the devil taking Jesus up into the.
And for me, I find that more easy to understand as figurative language. I understand that more in terms of internal psychological processes rather than an external being that's actively working to undermine us.
Well, then how can an average person like us here understand the Bible?
Well,
If it says this, but it really means this.
well, and that's part of so one of the things that we are doing with the Bible is there's always interpretation. There's always interpretation from what do these words say to what do they actually mean. Because there are parts of the Bible that really do read like a history. So if you're talking about things like First and Second Kings, First and Second Chronicles, those things are understood as here's how the history played out with this battle and that thing. And then there's stuff like Ezekiel and Isaiah that are meant as figurative poetic language that talks about understanding things in a metaphorical way. And so some of these things that we're looking at are meant to be understood in metaphors. Other stuff is more literal, and to figure out which is which really it becomes hard. And so folks who say I read the Bible literally, that is a choice of interpretation.
Wouldn't that be the simpler way?
It is a simpler way, but it may not be the most authentic way that conforms with how people have read these stories, these words for millennia. Because there are definitely points that people are expecting things in this Bible to be read as a metaphor. And there's other ones where, no, this is more nonfiction. And so it's a different take. Yeah.
Things back many years ago, they had a so-called disciple of Christ, Jim Jones,
Uh-huh.
who convinced a lot of people to follow him. In his eyes, he was a disciple of Christ. In all reality, he was the devil.
Yeah. I mean, and so I would end up saying that absolutely the man was a charlatan. He was leading people astray. I would also suggest that there were parts of him that were trying to be authentic and real, but he couldn't get there. There were, yeah. And so, I mean, it's sort of, thinking Hitler as well. I mean, he thought he was doing the right thing in some ways, but there are lots of ways that he absolutely was not. And so that's one of those things that I think within all of us, there's this tendency to go in different directions that are not life-giving, that kill, that harm, that cause injury, and to put it outside ourselves almost makes it so that we don't have to take accountability for it.
The same thing's true with a husband who browbeats his wife.
Yeah. Well, you made me do it. And so that I'm always hesitant. That's one of the problems that I see with sort of this external devil.
Well, not in Revelations, doesn't say the devil will be destroyed.
Yes. Evil, the devil, this external power will be destroyed. And when we think about Revelation is meant as one big old metaphor. It's meant as a story that provides hope for folks that are experiencing persecution and aren't sure where things are going to end up. And so that is meant as a story to help the people dealing with persecution in the time of, it's not Nero,
Well, that would help
but
people by destroying the devil.
right, but it's also this time in the future that okay, right now is bad, but here's what's going to eventually happen, and things are going to be better because God is going to come and renew the earth and destroy this. So we can end up talking about, the destruction of evil, the destruction of sin as something that is going to happen so that we no longer have these urges and tendencies that take us in a way that separates us from God and one another. That becomes what Revelation is talking about. But it's with all this weird language and imagery that just it has to be interpreted really a lot. And because it's so obscure, the interpretations are all over the place. And so, you know, you can go into this and talk about Jesus has authority. Jesus can end up pushing out these unclean spirits. I end up saying, yes, that's absolutely the case. And why is the unclean spirit afraid of Jesus? Because he brings change. Because the status quo that has been is not acceptable when Jesus is present.
Ellie brought up an interesting question when she referred to the gentleman who was upset speaking for us.
Yeah.
And he spoke for me. I would look at it a little differently. But what if he was speaking as us being, I don't know, in a illegal business?
Well, it could be,
And he's worried that, by golly, my business is gonna be gone if this all happens.
yeah, it could be, my business. It could be the community that's gathered there in the synagogue. Are you coming to destroy us and reduce us and change how we're supposed to do stuff? And so, I mean, but when we experience that point of change, it can feel like destruction. When you have to rethink the way that you are living together as a community of faith, it can feel like destruction. And they recognize that Jesus is bringing something different because he's teaching as one having authority and not just as the scribes that are going over, here's what it says.
They're sure funny churches that do react that way.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think that our congregation might do exactly that too. Is this a teaching Bible? This is New Revised Standard Version, and it has comments.
What does it say for chapter 24, for verse 24? What's the comment?
The comment for verse 24, the demon knows Jesus' identity as the Holy One of God. This knowledge, which most of the demons in Mark seem to have, can either be interpreted as an attempt by the demon to fight Jesus, since knowledge of someone's identity was often thought to give power over them, or as evidence of the cosmic world's full recognition of Jesus' authority, an authority which in the human world is continually challenged. So it's that, so this interpreter is focusing on the I know who you are, the Holy One of God. I mean, that's the crux of that verse. And so for this interpreter, I end up looking at a slightly different way because of that interpretive lens of this idea of have you come to destroy us? What's going to happen to us? And so,
Be a bunch of politicians.
oh yeah,
Somebody was thinking of heckles.
oh yeah.
It's like this guy was a heckler.
It's so nebulous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. And so we have to bring ourselves into the text. We have to bring ourselves, our views, and also the context. What is the original context? How does, Jewish society at this point in time understand itself? How would they have interpreted this? That becomes the whole crux of this.
Was Capernaum,
Capernaum?
yeah, Capernaum, whatever, was that kind of a rowdy town? I mean, was it a bunch of
Capernaum was a small town on the Sea of Galilee that had a lot of fish business, but it wasn't anything special.
He would have been unusual to come there, though, wouldn't he?
Right. I mean, he
Now they get up and follow him.
he called them, they followed, and they kept on going, and they went to this town, and on the Sabbath they went into a synagogue, and there he taught instead of like the scribe saying, well, on the one hand and the other, and here's what this says, and here's what this says, and here's what this says, and instead of making a determination, here's what it means. Jesus is sort of like, here's the authority, here's what's happening. And people are, are sitting up and saying, what is this? A new teaching with authority? Even the unclean spirits obey him. And so there's surprise by everyone there. What does this mean? How does this work? So anyway, we are a few minutes over. Interesting conversation, and we will pick things up next time. Should we go ahead and have our benediction real quick? May the Lord watch between me and thee while we are absent one from the other. Thanks, friends. I'm sorry if conversation didn't really come to any conclusions, but, there's just lots of questions to keep on noodling over. Uh-huh. I think that it is, because God wants us to continue because if we have the answers, there's no need for a relationship. But if we have the questions, there's a need for a relationship to figure things out.
Jonah and the whale didn't really happen.
I don't think so. I mean, when you look at Jonah, some of it is just really far-fetched. That a tree grows up in one day, and then the worm eats big enough to shelter Jonah, and then in the night a worm eats it and it dies. That's a little bit much. Same thing with a fish swallowing and him living in the belly of the whale for 3 days and then being spit up.
What about resurrecting the dead?
Resurrecting the dead, that's a different story.
I'd say that's a bigger challenge than living in a.
I understand. And so, yeah, I mean, that becomes a different
What's the big old challenge?
conversation.
Resurrecting people.
Yeah,
from the
what
dead.
about people being resurrected from the dead?
Oh,
How does that work? If you aren't willing to say Jonah and the whale, Jonah and the fish was a story meant for interpretation, well,
I
what
could
is
see
that?
that one more, because sometimes people die and they're they think they're dead and they're not.
Yeah, right. Sometimes they die.
That one I can see.
Yeah, I mean, it all becomes,
3 days later, they wake up.
yeah.
When you look at where it came from, if it's a lot of gibberish, it says, your bank name or somebody you know.
How are you, Alan? I am too. Some days are better than others.
That's true for everybody.
That's true for everybody, Rick.
Yeah, especially around this.
Yeah.